get real close to it. And when I put these on YouTube, I try to remember to get rid of the goofy look at the very start, but last week I kind of missed that too. So we're looking at 1 Corinthians. This is our I believe our third sermon in 1 Corinthians. It's a real important book, as they all are. St. Paul wrote this from Ephesus about 55 or 56. They've been able to get the date down pretty close because of various events that happened in the world during that time that are referred to here. There's pretty good evidence that this is the second letter to the Corinthians, even though it's called 1 Corinthians. The first letter was lost and we do not have it. So it wasn't inspired, obviously, but we do not have it. There's we'll look at that later on because it's mentioned here in this letter. Corinth, as we've talked about before, just to kind of remind you, was a Roman colony on an isthmus in Greece. And this isthmus was only 4 miles wide. It separated the Mediterranean Sea from the Aegean Sea. And ships would come in there. The small ships were actually hauled across the isthmus on a track, wheeled track. They would get these ships up on this carriage and haul them 4 miles across and dump them over in the Mediterranean. It saved them about 100 miles of storms and things like that. The big ships would be unloaded and then reloaded to other ships on the other side. It was a real commercial place. There was lots of different. It was a very diverse place. There was lots of different people there from different areas. The city had been destroyed in 146 and then later rebuilt by the Romans about 100 years later. And so there was Romans there. It was used by the Roman army to retire their soldiers. It's a nice tropical place where you could go and live out the rest of your life. And there was Greeks that come back. There was Jews. There was all these philosophers. The Greeks brought these philosophers in. It was also a very immoral city. Actually, according to Leon Morris, he said it was intellectually alert, materially prosperous, and morally bankrupt or corrupt. Kind of describes today, doesn't it? Kind of describes how our country is. You know, we're prosperous, we're wealthy, we're all very, there's lots of intelligent thought going around, lots of books being written, lots of wisdom of man going around, but we're morally bankrupt. We're morally corrupt because of all the abortion. The abortion has killed millions of people. Not only that, but just the rank immorality that goes on, starting a lot of times from Hollywood and moving east. But we are, if you look at the world today, the secular world, it's pretty close to what Ephesus was. Corinth. There was a temple on top of a hill there. It was 1,800 feet above the water. It's called the Acrocorinth, and there was a big temple up there that employed upward to 1,000 women who were prostitutes and priestesses. So it's a pretty corrupt place. You could drink, you could have fun, whatever you wanted to do there, they were okay with it. And so Paul was addressing this church that was started there when he visited. He got this church started. And the church, of course, as always, reflects the community. So there were people there who gave their life to Christ, but they still had the taint of the old system with them. And that happens today too, you know. There were still rich people, there were still slaves, there were still ex-prostitutes, and, you know, some of them may have still been doing things. There was all these philosophers, and so the church was just in a mess because of that. And this is why 1 Corinthians was written to address all that. So starting in verse 18, I'll read this again that Jeff read. For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it's the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs and Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and folly to Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. That's a pretty big statement there, isn't it? And you know it is. When you think about it, I know some of you have probably been saved most of your life. I haven't. So when I was a younger man, it was foolishness to me. You know, I believed in God. I believed God. I didn't disbelieve that God created the world and all that. But at the same time, it just didn't seem to apply to me. It didn't seem right to me. And that's what they're saying here. And when you think about it, what would you do if you were going to save people in the world, give them salvation? Let's say you're God and you're going to give salvation to people on the earth. How would you go about it? Well, most of us we'd want them to learn all about us and, beforehand, and we'd want these people to quit doing all this stuff they're doing and get clean, and we'd want them to be reasonably intelligent and be able to talk about it. We'd probably want them to go to school for a while and learn about it so they wouldn't mess everything up after they got saved. And build up enough points to where, do a bunch of good deeds, bring in some groceries and some clothing for people, and go out and put salve on the wounds of the wounded and visit the prisons. And, we'd want them to be good, really good people. Not only that, we wouldn't want to make any mistakes because that just cut down their little score. God didn't do it that way. He did not do it that way. And so to unbelievers, the idea of a man 2,000 years ago or more dying on a cross to save people was just foolish. It was ridiculous. They couldn't even respect this guy, He didn't come. He should have come all dressed up in finery and proclaimed it to everybody and said, I'm here to save you, And not only that, he'd back it up with an army. That'd be even better. Come in and build a big palace, and, that's just the way it was done. So, but Paul explains it differently. The gospel is so different, and we're used to it. We're used to saying Jesus saved us on the cross. We've gotten used to that. But if you can, put yourself in the shoes of someone who is not saved and who has not grew up in the church. What do they think? And you see it out here in the world. You see what they think. The other day, Jerry Nadler in Congress said that God didn't have any authority in Congress. There's less and less belief in the United States right now than any other time in history. But Paul said that not only is the gospel available through the written word and through the revelation of God to each of us, but it's also plain through nature, like Barbara and Robert were talking about this morning. It tells us in chapter 1 of Romans, for what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they become futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools. He's describing these same people we're talking about here, the Greek philosophers, the Jewish lawyers, the debaters, people who are like that. Some think they can get to heaven by being good. You know, that's a pretty prevalent thing today. You see it in movies. You know, all the movies about Christianity are about being good, building up those points. Because nobody wants to recognize that a man died on a cross and did all these awful things, you know, or let all these awful things be done to him for salvation. C.S. Lewis says, "Can't you lead a good life without believing in Christianity? This is the question on which I've been asked to write, and straight away, before I begin trying to answer it, I have a comment to make. The question sounds as if it were being asked by a person who said to himself, 'I don't care whether Christianity is in fact true or not. I'm not interested in finding out whether the real universe is more like what the Christians say than what the materialists say. All I'm interested in is leading a good life. I'm going to choose my beliefs not because I think them true, but because I think them helpful.'" He wrote that in a book called Man or Rabbit, God in the Dock, page 108. And it's true, you know, there's a lot of people out there, if you meet them, there's even people in the church out there who are more there for the convenience than because they believe. You know, don't ask them if they believe, because they might have to stretch it a bit. But atheism is growing wild in our society, and we're kind of the ones responsible for it, because we didn't. You know, I'm talking about the church as a whole. The church as a whole didn't work at this enough to get the word out enough. And you think that's crazy because of many churches they are, but obviously we're losing America, and that shouldn't be. But you even have a lot of highly educated people who promote atheism, who write books about it. Richard Dawkins is one that comes to mind when I'm thinking about him. He even said that, you know, if you look at the world, at the evidence, you'd think that would prove there's God, but it does on the surface, but then it really don't. You know, it's kind of like he's recognizing the evidence is there, but he don't want to see it. And I think that's true of a lot of people. There's a lot of people following false religions, and there's a lot of false religions out there. There's a lot of religious cults that are derived from Christianity but aren't really truly Christian. Christianity is an exclusive faith, and that's one of the things that bothers the secular world so much. You know, if we said, you know, we get to heaven through Jesus, but if you need to get to heaven through an imam or a Buddhist teacher or somebody, that's okay too. You know, if we said that, everybody'd be real happy. They just accept us. But there's one verse that just kind of really screws that up, you know. Unfortunately, Jesus said it, so, you know, I can't just dismiss it. He said, "I'm the way. I'm the only way to heaven." You know, not just a way, but the only way. He said that. So Jesus took, for us who believe, Jesus took the sins of the world on his shoulders on the cross. And he paid for that. And the proof of that was the resurrection. You know, if he hadn't been resurrected, he would just be somebody who died on a cross, and thousands of them. You know, in AD 70, when Jerusalem fell, they used every stick of wood they could find to make crosses out of. And they said the hills around Jerusalem were full of crosses. So crucifixion was not that unique in itself. But, and crucifying Jesus on the cross wouldn't have been unique if he hadn't have proved that he defeated death and that he did take the sins of the world. So here in verse 19, Paul quotes from Isaiah 29:14. You know, men have always considered in their pride that their ways and expression of their wisdom is superior, to be preferred to God's way. And God pledged to overthrow that wisdom. The Corinthians couldn't trust in their own wisdom because it would lead to destruction. And you know, the sad fact is, we're all self-serving, prideful Pharisees. You know, that we are. We're all proud of something, aren't we? You know, we use the word proud a lot. I'm proud of you. I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of myself for being proud of you. I'm just really a good guy, you know? That's what kind of the way we are. We're deceived by pride. And in the most subtle ways, you know, a lot of times you don't even realize it. Most of the time you don't. We're all proud of something. And, you know, pride has its place, but not when it comes to belief in God. Verse 20 said, God makes the wise look foolish. The apostle here exposes the futility of human wisdom. And he asked 3 questions. He said, first one says, where is the one who's wise? And here he's probably referring to the Greeks. The Greeks had a great civilization down in Athens and through the Greek peninsula there. And even after they were defeated by the Romans and brought into the empire, wealthy Romans in Rome and in other places would bring in Greek teachers to teach their children because Greeks had this real grasp on philosophy. They taught philosophy and they taught rhetoric. And rhetoric is the art of speaking. You know, you had to know the flowery ways of doing it, the flawless coming out. You had to know your subject. Rhetoric was something the Greeks did really well. And philosophy, they still teach Greek philosophy in colleges. Plato, you know, there's others. They still teach them because they were wise. You know, they had wisdom, but not when it comes to God. He made them look foolish. Corinth had plenty of Greeks. And then the next question, where is the scribe? And scribes are the Jewish lawyers that he's referring to. They were experts in the Jewish laws, 10 Commandments and all the ones that derive from them, up to 600 of those laws. These Jewish scholars were experts in the Old Testament. And it probably offended them. The cross probably offended them more than it did the Jews or the Greeks. Because the Greeks were secular. They believed in all these pagan gods. They were pagans. The Jews believed in God, but they didn't believe Jesus was the Messiah. And then the third question, he said, where's the debater of this age? And the Greeks and Romans were both, they loved debates. And they could talk all day about the origin of the universe, you know, whether we're really here or not. And all these questions that are still debated today, they debated them too. And they were really good at that. And I'm sure that they proved time and time again that the gospel was foolishness to themselves. But you know, it talks about in Acts where Paul went down to Mars Hill and he debated with them there at Mars Hill. God demonstrated the bankruptcy of human wisdom because he accomplished what they failed to do. All this wisdom don't accomplish anything as far as salvation is concerned. Only Christ on the cross can do that. And God's way includes everybody. You know, God's a monarch who's very democratic when it comes to salvation because it's open to everyone. Now, there's a debate on whether everyone will ever accept it or not, but there's no debate that the door is open. And God saved those who believe. Paul states it's God's purpose that man by his own wisdom could never come to the knowledge of God. But God in his sovereign ways chose to reveal salvation through the foolishness of preaching. So that's what I'm doing up here this morning. I'm being very foolish. And you know, really, if you look at that from a secular viewpoint, I am. Because I'm talking about something that don't even exist, you know. I'm talking about a power that's just made up. And that's the way an atheist would look at it. So Paul's correct here. But the foolishness of preaching is what brings people to God. And Paul recognized that, and Paul practiced that. The preacher is the one who gives the lost the knowledge to tap into that power of God in such a way as to convict them. It's not the preacher's power, it's God's power through the preacher. A young man asked a rich old man how he made his money. And the old guy fingered his lapel and said, "Well, son, it was 1932, the depth of the Depression. I was down to my last nickel. I invested that nickel in an apple. I spent the entire day polishing the apple, and at the end of the day, I sold the apple for 10 cents. The next morning, I invested those 10 cents in 2 apples. I spent the entire day polishing them and sold them at 5 p.m. for 20 cents. I continued this system for a month, by the end of which I'd accumulated a fortune of $1.37. Then my wife's father died and left us $2 million. So we can't have anything of lasting value through our own efforts. It has to come from God. And God's where the $1 million comes from. But in verse 22, the Jews seek a sign and wisdom. These Jews were seeking signs. They knew that the Messiah was coming because of what the Old Testament had taught. But they were looking in the wrong direction, because salvation for a city that was besieged or oppressed always came in the form of a big army coming down the road, you know. And that's how they expected Jesus to arrive, at the head of a big army, probably being carried in a sedan chair with all the finery. He'd come out wearing a white robe and a crown and go up and he would take over the temple and proclaim himself. It's not the way he did it, as we know. God revealed his plan in a crucified Christ, which is totally at odds with anything that we would do. They were looking for a king of earthly power. I was reading about, this was back around 2001. You know, when Star Wars was so popular, and I guess it still is to some extent, but an astonishing 20,000 Canadians declared themselves to be followers of the religion of Jedi. Now, that's something that's just in a movie. The Guardians of Peace and Justice in the Star Wars flicks. Statistics Canada reported in the latest and final data to come out from the 2001 census, Derek Evans is the director of the Naramatra Centre just north of Penticton, British Columbia, which is affiliated with the United Church of Canada. He understands why young people may be drawn to the force. It's part of a journey of a young man discovering the powers that rest within himself and how he can access it for his own strength and nurture, or the people he cares about, through focusing his intentions on good, said Evans. I think that's what most great religious traditions teach us. Well, excuse me, folks, but BS. You know, BS. The gospel is the exact opposite of that. The exact opposite. You don't have any power of salvation. You don't have any power to be good without Christ. I'm not saying people who don't believe can't do good things. They can. I think there's some power of God in everybody because God made us in his image. But to actually be saved, you have to believe that Christ is your Redeemer. It's not enough to believe he came and lived here on the earth. It's not enough to believe he died on the cross. It's not enough to believe that he taught love and he taught all these good things in the gospel. You have to depend on him. You have to trust him. And that's the essence of the gospel. The power one receives when he becomes a Christian is not his own, but it's from the Spirit of God. The cross is a stumbling block. the only way you can be saved is by believing in the power of the blood of Christ shed on the cross. That's the only way. So it's a stumbling block to anyone who don't want to do that, who can't make that leap. Believing in God's not enough. Believing in Jesus as a great man who come to help us is not enough. And actual fact, C.S. Lewis recognized this too. In actual fact, if Jesus was not God, then he was probably a crazy man. Because he said things that a normal man wouldn't be able to get away with. The essence of it is God's plan is wiser than man's plan. God's wiser than men. We can't get to heaven through our own efforts. We can't get to heaven through debate and through philosophy. There's cults out there who'll knock on your door wanting to give you pamphlets and such. That's what they're doing. They're trying to get to heaven through some other means than Christ. The cross is the wisdom of God in the world, and he doesn't display it through high-thinking philosophy. The gospel is contrary to how we would obtain salvation if we could do it on our own. If I could do it on my own, I'd set up a big school for people. I'd make sure I only got the best. If you weren't smart, you wouldn't make it with me. But you make it with Jesus. He's different. Galatians 2:20 said, I've been crucified with Christ. No longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. And that's the essence of it. And I hopefully everybody's got a good grasp of that, and hopefully everybody here believes that. Let's pray. Thank you, Father, for your word, for the writing of Paul, and for showing us, Lord, that your wisdom is, the very least of your wisdom is much, much higher than anything man can come up with. We praise you and thank you. We ask you for a blessed day. In Jesus' name.